motion is, this House believes the class system is static, irrespective of wealth acquisition. And I look to Francis Varley, again, to open the case for the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you. At first glance, it seems rather illogical, doesn't it? That I'm standing here in front of you all tonight to argue for the rigidity of the class system. Me, the librarian of the Oxford Union with my northern accent and state school education. Surely I should be telling you that our class system is fluid, that it's mobile, and that it's possible to overcome the so-called challenges of our origins, because I, like so many others in this room, am well on my way to achieving social mobility. But I'm not. I'm standing in front of you all tonight to argue precisely the opposite. I'm going to stand here in my ball gown in this hallowed hall and tell you that the class system that we continue to impose upon ourselves is immovable, that it is unchanging, and that it isn't affected by how much wealth you may come to acquire in your lifetime. Because the class system, as I understand it, is our organisation of society around distinct groups, each with intrinsic tendencies and interests that differ from other groups, whether this is in terms of the social, the cultural, or the political. When arranged in a hierarchical structure, the differences between these groups can become antagonistic, or indeed they can become subdued and absorbed into the system. I can't pretend to know about statistics or surveys or Marxian philosophy. I'll leave that to the experts. But what I do know about are the inherent, often unconscious biases that we, as students at the University of Oxford, have with regards to class. Tonight, I want to dwell on some of these issues and try to show that actually, no matter how much money we'll earn on the back of our Oxford degrees, class mobility is nothing more than an illusion. But first, it falls on me, as always, to introduce your opposition speakers tonight. First, we have the indomitable Simon Jago, a second-year lawyer at Wadham and a member of the Union's Secretaries Committee. Simon is participating in the elections tomorrow as a candidate for the Standing Committee, and I wish him the very best of luck. Rumour has it that the election is going to be wildly contested, with an incredible 5 candidates for 5 positions. Democracy at its finest, I'm sure you'll agree. Anyone who knows Simon will probably be a little surprised to see him on the opposition benches tonight. All I can say is that I'm indebted to him for allowing me to exploit the institutional hierarchy so that I could speak on the proposition for my final union debate. Michael Dungokshin is the current world and European #1 in competitive debating and will be the chief adjudicator at the upcoming World Championships in Mexico. In a former life, Michael was also a student politician and served as the president of the Cambridge Union. I can say with the utmost honesty that speaking against him tonight is a terrifying prospect indeed. Finally, Lord Christopher Monckton is a businessman, newspaper editor, hereditary peer and political advisor. He assisted with Mrs Thatcher's right to buy policy after writing a paper for the CPS on the privatisation of council housing. Since 2009, Lord Monckton has been a regular, although unsuccessful, UKIP candidate. I do hope tomorrow's candidates haven't been asking him for advice. On behalf of everyone who's been working on putting together this debate, I'd like to offer my sincerest thanks to both Michael and Lord Monckton for stepping in to participate at the last minute after a series of scheduling classes in ill health. Mr. President, these are your guests, and they are most welcome. I went to a state selective grammar school near Huddersfield in West Yorkshire. My parents never went to university, my grandparents certainly didn't. I'm from a corner of the country that has an inherent and profound pride in its industrial and by extension working class past. Everywhere you look, there are remnants in the Industrial Revolution, whether it's the grand old woolen mills that have now been converted into fashionable flats, the labyrinth of canals that are now more commonly visited by dog walkers than narrowboats, or the endless rows of soot-stained terrace houses that haven't changed for decades. In truth, most things haven't changed for decades, but that's part of the beauty of it. I'd always been told, and I'd always truly believed, that where I came from was the best place on earth. After else, why else would they call it God's own county? So coming to Oxford was a shock to the system. My new friends would laugh every time I asked if anyone was off at all for tea, or that someone was right mardy when they're hungover, or even just every time I said no with too flat of a vowel. Suddenly, I had become the other, and I realised that I just wasn't part of the same world as the vast majority of my peers. Now, for the first time in my life, I was doubting some of the most fundamental parts of my identity, and I wasn't alone in feeling like this. An actor gets a poor review for their attempt at a regional accent in a student production of an obscure postmodern play at the Burton Taylor. Except it's not an attempt. That's their voice. But of course, any regional accent on the stage can't possibly be natural, because people who sound like that don't exist in universities like this. A tutor remarks that there's a surprising eloquence in your work, Fran, which means they fully expected you to write like that bit in Wuthering Heights where Joseph's dialect is transliterated. One of Oxford's slightly less famous but equally notorious drinking societies buys out the Duke of Cambridge on the spot for drinks, because that's a normal and acceptable thing to do. Whether through unconscious microaggressions or a genuine sense of entitlement, class disparity is on show every day in Oxford. So let's return to first year, Fran. Some of my new friends belong to an elite world that was wholly and completely inaccessible to me. They had a kind of unique, unassailable confidence that only a private education can provide. They already knew each other from their affluent neighbourhoods in South London, their gap years in Thailand, or had been in the same boarding house since they were 13. It was becoming increasingly apparent to me that this elite bubble was something that I could never enter. I could have won the lottery in third week, and it still wouldn't change the fact that I could count the number of people in Oxford from my grammar school in my year with the fingers on one hand, and that I just wasn't a part of this world. Sure, we were all at Oxford, but our experiences and expectations could not be more distinct. I've grown to learn now that actually this sense of distinction and otherness wasn't just a fresher's homesickness. It was exemplary of a much deeper problem. These circles and networks, the ones that people can never be truly a part of, don't stop once you leave the city of dreaming spires. Old boys clubs, favours, getting an internship because you went on varsity with a girl whose dad works at Morgan Stanley. They're all just bywords for nepotism. You can't buy access to these networks overnight. You can't buy access to them at all. Not even a self-made millionaire could worm their way into the exclusive club of elite society. Now, it is true to say that money and this kind of status do often go hand in hand, but it is not true that one is necessarily dependent on the other. An aristocratic family can lose their family seat as a result of years of financial mismanagement, but they'll still maintain the same kinds of social privileges and expectations that they've always had. A working-class teenager can sell things out the back of their dad's van and turn it into a multi-million-pound business, but the spectre of their humble origins will prevent them from being truly equal to their more blue-blooded peers. But why? Why, when our working-class hero manages to make it big, are they not wholly absorbed into the social equivalent of the economic group to which they now belong? Perhaps it only matters if you're the ones with something to lose within the power structure that is the class system. Perhaps it is the case that social mobility is nothing but an enticing aspirational fallacy to keep the unruly populace in their place. However overtly or subconsciously, we're told that to be part of the lower echelons of society is inherently bad, and that we ought to strive to remove ourselves as quickly as possible. We're told that coming to Oxford is the first step to achieving this. So we suppress our accents. We reply vaguely to that age-old question, so where did you go to school? And we work ourselves into the ground to try to fit in. But really it's impossible, because no matter how hard we try, we will never be able to get away from our backgrounds. Research conducted by the Sutton Trust in 2015 showed that privately educated graduates from the same institution with the same degree would earn on average 7% more than their state school counterparts 3.5 years after graduation. The system is a vicious cycle and a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, St Hilda's College recently announced the creation of a class liberation officer within their JCR, a move that I've not quite made up my mind about, but one that shows an acceptance of the significance of classism and the difficulties faced by those from lower class backgrounds in Oxford. The value of class as an axis by which we ought to understand our society is one that is criminally overlooked. In this university, we pride ourselves on our liberalism, tolerance and understanding, but I argue that we cannot truly be intersectional without ascribing the same value to class as we do to gender, sexuality or race. Without discussions surrounding class, our intersectionality is limited by the echo chamber of our environment, and Oxford is one of the biggest echo chambers of them all. Ultimately, social mobility in the sense that we understand it in this country doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because the class system is perpetuated and upheld by those that benefit from its rigidity, and in doing so, keep those who do not at its mercy. But just because social mobility doesn't exist, that doesn't mean we should turn our backs on the pursuit of equality. If I've learned anything from my time in Oxford, and indeed my time in the Union as both drew ever closer to a close, is that we don't have to conform to whatever it is that is expected of us. You don't have to change yourself because some arbitrary vision system demands it. I've come to realise that actually I'm not entirely sure if I'm that bothered that I might never escape my metaphorical working class chains. And I'm not that bothered that I'm not going to be a part of the elite that upholds the system. To try to change that would be to deny a fundamental part of who I am, and I'm not willing to do that. Instead, we can be proud of who we are and where we come from, of where we went to school and the jobs our parents have, of the rows of terraced houses and the abandoned coal mines, because they are so much more valuable than we are conditioned to believe. So, for those of you in this room who know what it is to feel like who you are isn't quite enough, take some advice from a boring old finalist and vote for the proposition tonight. Thank you.